Joining me now all the way from Albania is senior columnist with the Australian newspaper, Nick Cater. Nick, let's talk Olympics. The boxing scandal in Paris is deepening further. Today we had Taiwan's Lin Yuting, who's one of the two boxers who have XY chromosomes, according to tests carried out by the IBA, which saw them banned from the women's boxing events last year, but the IOC is happy to allow these to beat up real women. And today, Lin Yuting advanced to the gold medal round in the featherweight category after beating Turkey's Esra Yediz Karaman. Now, she made an X symbol with her fingers after the fight. This has become a protest among some of the female fighters to say, we are women with XX chromosomes and we're being forced to fight against those with XY chromosomes, which we normally refer to as men. The Algerian fighter Khalif is also going to be competing for gold in the welterweight category tomorrow. His team call the outrage surrounding the fighter a Zionist conspiracy. Nick, what do you make of this? If we're going to have these two winning gold in their categories, I think this issue is going to explode even further.
This is terrible for the Olympics, Rita. I mean, right throughout Europe, especially this part of Europe, former Eastern Europe, where people tend to be pretty conservative, they find this absolutely outrageous. And the whole reputation of the Olympics, I think, is struggling because of this. And I don't think really the Olympic Committee really quite understand how much trouble they're in over this. This is further discrediting of the Olympic brand, which they like to promote and make a lot of money out of. I'm sorry, people are over it. This is just not sport. It is unnatural. It is quite obvious what is going on. And the failure of the Olympic authorities actually to put their foot down. As for this idea the Zionist conspiracy is to blame here, is that the Z chromosome, Rita? Have I missed something there? I don't know.
Well, there's also Russian conspiracies being blamed, all sorts of diversions and nonsense being circulated. But at the end of the day, you could do a simple sex test, gender test. The IOC used to do them. Now they think they're not, politically correct. But that's what you need to do. And then you can establish very quickly who is qualified to compete against women and who shouldn't be eligible. And that's what the IBA does, but the IOC just refuses to abide by that. Now, I want to ask you about this. I know this is an issue you care deeply about and you've personally investigated in some of your writing, but there's a report in the Weekly Times this week on the steep cost of decommissioning wind farm turbines. Farmers hosting these wind turbines have been warned they risk losing their properties if they fail to lock in decommissioning costs in their lease agreements with developers. Law firm McCulloch and Robertson estimates the cost of decommissioning a single turbine is $400,000 to $600,000. And Nick, this appears to be something else the Green Dream proponents have failed to consider.
This is widespread throughout the industry, Rita, and I've heard these complaints from people in Queensland and New South Wales that they've had a look at the contract and they said, no, we're not doing that. Look, I mean, there's something deeply wrong here. If you wanted to dig a coal mine or anything of that nature, you would have to stump up a lot of money which would go in a trust account and would be there ready to rehabilitate the mine after you'd finished digging it up. Now, with wind turbines, solar panels, there's none of that. The developers are not expected to put that money up at all. There's usually limited or no plan at all for rehabilitation, and yet we know that these turbines would last probably at best 20 years if you're really lucky, probably more like 15. And the hundreds of tons of concrete that go into the base of these things, all that cannot be used again. It has to be left, and if they want to put another turbine up, they have to do it all over again. The amount of waste, the amount of disturbance to the ground is massive, and this just is not being taken into account. And the new thing that's happening now in the United States, you've probably seen, is that wind turbine blades are crumbling. They're falling apart because they're now so big. You know, a wind turbine now, a modern 7 megawatt wind turbine is probably higher than the Eiffel Tower by the time you go to the top of the blade. to the bottom of the ground, and that is putting enormous tension on the blades. So they've become literally unsustainable, I think, as a means of producing electricity, and this has to collapse. At some point, people will wake up and say, nah, this is silly. It's not a sensible way.
Well, we're talking about not just a couple of dozen of these things. Just in the west of Victoria, the Liberal MP Richard Riordan told the Weekly Times there are around 1,300 of these turbines just in Victoria's west, and the cost would be around $650 million to decommission them in today's dollars, and it's obviously going to be a lot more into the future. Now, let's talk about solar panel manufacturing. SunDrive Solar, which manufactures panels and is backed by the likes of former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull and billionaire Mike Cannon-Brookes. The reports, Nick, they're getting ready to cut up to 35 jobs. This is despite the company signing a deal with AGL, and this deal was signed after the federal government announced $1 billion in subsidies and grants to promote Australia's solar manufacturing industry. And even with that market manipulation, Nick, it seems like these companies are not thriving. Well, some of them certainly aren't.
Yeah. This future made in Australia plan, Rita, it's a kiss of death for any business. I would not take any money from the Albanese government. I mean, look what's happened to the solar panels. They took $1 billion from the government. This is a company backed by people as important and smart as Malcolm Turnbull, apparently, but it's now not doing as well as it thought. It's not going to be able to manufacture solar panels, as Chris Bowen said. And then, of course, there was Twiggy Forrest and his great green hydrogen dreams, in which the government sunk billions of dollars. Now, Twiggy Forrest has admitted that that's not going to work either. So if you want a successful business, avoid taking money from the Albanese government, because that is the mark of a loser, really.
Well, there are people who are benefiting from this taxpayer largesse. I'm not sure who they are, but all that money is lining someone's pockets along the way. And talking about enormous amounts of money, former Qantas CEO Alan Joyce, he's going to have his 2023 pay reduced by $9.3 million due to the airline's commitment to implementing all the recommendations from its governance review. So he was set to receive this massive package at $23.6 million. That's been cut to just a measly $14.9 million, Nick. I don't know how he's going to cope with that. Other executives will have to take cuts as well. It's, I've got to say, not a great surprise after the way he left the airline. You had the $120 million settlement with the ACCC. There's still federal court judgments to come on the illegal outsourcing of ground handling workers, and just the reputation of the company with the political fights it's got itself involved in, completely unnecessarily alienating segments of its customer base. Is this a fair enough decision, or does Joyce have grounds to be upset?
He has no grounds to be upset whatsoever, Rita, but the people who do are the hard-working Qantas passengers who save up to pay for some outrageous fare to go and see their grandkids or their relatives in Melbourne from Sydney, or the other way around. You know, I mean, this is crazy. This doesn't pass the pub test. I'm sorry. You know, to have your wages slashed from 23 million to 14 million for 1 year. I'm sorry. Most people would say, no, what about the other 14 million? You know, this is just ridiculous when people are scraping together to try and afford, you know, to find that extra couple of $100 to be able to pay off the mortgage in full, that, you know, their mortgage repayment that month, you know, the school uniforms, you know, the whole lot, you know. It's so far removed from the world of ordinary people that it's just really damaging, I think, for the Qantas brand and any suggestion that they're there for all Australians. They're not. You know, they're providing a sinecure, a lot of money for a few executives, and the customer service, as you know, in Qantas is questionable at best. I'm flying back Japan Airlines, by the way.
Oh, so yes, I've only flown them once, but they were very good. Have a great flight. Albania, I'll have to ask you about
Very
Albania,
good.
one part of the world I've never been to. Now, let's talk about the Greens. They're demanding the Albanese government sanction what they call the extremist Netanyahu government in Israel, planning to put a motion to the Senate as early as Monday. Greens leader Adam Ban said if Labor wants to change the debate, they should change their position, starting with sanctioning the extremist Netanyahu government, recognising Palestine and ending the two-way military trade with Israel. Nick, among the left, it's undeniable to say there is anger at Labor for not sanctioning Israel, not recognising Palestine. The Greens must see opportunity and votes in the course of action they're taking.
Well, they do, and apparently they're out campaigning in heavily Muslim-populated seats around Sydney and Melbourne in the hope of winning those votes. I doubt they'll be very successful, though. I mean, it may be that there may be some people in those Muslim communities, not all of them, by the way, who support the Palestinian cause and wish them all the best in sanctioning Israel. That's not all Muslims, mind you, but it is some of them. But when they look at the rest of the Greens' policies on say, taking guns away from police and tasers away from police and all this sort of extreme LGBTQ stuff amongst a community that really, by and large, didn't even support gay marriage, I don't think there's going to be much sympathy for them at all. So I think they're really just fighting for a handful of inner-city votes with Labor, and good luck to them if that's what they want to fight over.
Well, it's going to be very interesting how that relationship develops because, yes, they may be on the same page with segments of the Muslim population when it comes to Israel's war with Hamas. But like you said, the rest of their agenda is not going to be embraced, particularly their endless culture wars, their positions on things like trans policy, what should be taught in schools. All of that would be, for the people they're trying to appeal to, any sort of awareness of the Greens' positions in those areas is going to see them put at the very bottom of the vote. They're not going to be backing people who want to teach their children pronouns and support young people being able to access puberty blockers and other treatments. Just on that issue alone, and there's a bunch of others we could be speaking about. Nick Cater, thank you so much for your time. Enjoy Albania.